This wasn't part of my original sermon, but I want to just say a couple things about the parable that's at the end of this gospel lesson, because it kind of can leave a bad taste in our mouths, especially when you think about somebody being tortured until they could pay their debt. Or it really, of all the parables in the New Testament, especially that Christ spoke, this one is problematic, at least to me. And so when you think about that parable, I want you also to think about what you read in Psalm 133, which is more indicative of the God whom is demonstrated throughout the Old and New Testament. And it says at the 12 and 13, as far as the east is from the west, so far has he removed our sins from us. As our Father cares for his children, so does the Lord care for those who fear him. And in verse 8, the Lord is full of compassion and mercy, slow to anger, and of great kindness. So when you read that particular parable, hear that particular parable, I want you to weigh it against really the whole tradition of the Bible, which is God is full of compassion and mercy. I know parables or exaggerations that make us think, but that one is a pretty harsh exaggeration about who God is and how God acts. Even though we say Jesus said it, I would have, as somebody said, when I die, I'm going to have a discussion with God. Well, I'm going to have a discussion with Jesus about that parable. In our world today, and throughout time, we have people which in literature we call archetypes. And those archetypes can be warriors or healers or anything like that. They can be priests. It's someone with whom you hold up as a hero, and you want to emulate what that archetype does. And we have archetypes throughout our society today, especially in the movies, with all the superheroes that are coming to the screen, the Black Panther, in our old days, Superman and Superwoman. There's the Green Lantern. I can't name them all. And in those archetypes, we have somebody, some superhero, Catwoman, whatever, who is able to overcome evil by doing something good. They overpower evil. And so therefore we see what society can be like if evil is overpowered. And our children have those superheroes as their heroes because it helps them understand how they too can act as people in the world. Even though they're not a superhero, they still can try to follow the example of the superheroes which they like. Now in today's readings, we have two ordinary people that I want you to pay attention to. One of these people, I think, acts more like a superhero, and the other one acts more like you and me. And let's talk about the one who acts more like you and me, and that's Peter. God bless Peter, because Peter is the one of the most human disciples that is depicted in the New Testament. Peter is a person who's pragmatic. He's so pragmatic that he understands and is able to be honest with Jesus. He understands and is honest and is able to express to Jesus, Jesus, it's hard to forgive. Now, if I forgive my friends in the church or even outside of the church 7 times for a sin that they keep committing, isn't that good enough? Now, when you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. 7 is a holy number in the Bible. And also God created the world in 7 days. And we have 7 days of the week. And so if somebody harms you 7 times, that's a whole lot. And isn't there a time in our lives when we say it's enough, and I can't forgive anymore, I'm just going to get back at them. But Jesus surprises Peter when he says, no, you are to forgive 77 times. In other words, an infinite number of times. Over and over and over and over and over again. Now this doesn't mean that you and I are to be wet noodles and let everybody run over us. But it does say that when we stand up and fight for ourselves and defend ourselves, we are not supposed to push the other person down. In other words, we're not supposed to take the hurt that we feel that they have given to us and beat them over the head with So often we are like Peter in our lives. And I like to think that Peter was so pragmatic that he was what I call a sin accountant. He carried with him a spreadsheet of all the wrongs that had happened to him, who had done it to them, when it happened, and how he was hurt. And Jesus is saying today in this gospel, tear it up, burn it up, get rid of it. It's what we're supposed to do as Christian people. And we all know how terribly, terribly difficult that is. Now, in contrast to Peter, we have Joseph from the book of Genesis. Now, does everybody remember Joseph's story? Joseph, the youngest son, many brothers, favored of the family, who is so favored by the father with every gift that the father bestows on this child, that when he and his many brothers are out away from the family place, they decide they're going to murder him. And one brother, Reuben, intercedes and says, "Oh, wait a minute, that's a little harsh to murder our brother. Rather, let's throw him down into that empty cistern we all know about. We'll leave him there." Now, Reuben had good intentions. He was trying to play both ends of the stick, as it were. He was going to come back, we think, and rescue his brother from the cistern. So they throw him in the cistern. But before Reuben can get back, the brothers see a caravan of merchants come by. And they said, well, rather than kill him, why don't we make a little profit? Why don't we make a little money? And so they sell their brother Joseph into slavery. Convince the father that Joseph is dead. And everybody's happy, so to speak. Joseph has a horrible time in Egypt, but he works his way up until he is the Pharaoh's right-hand man, so to speak. And he's in charge of vast amounts of the kingdom. And the brothers return to go to Egypt because they are in the midst of a terrible drought and they're hungry. And they come to Pharaoh's court to beg for food. They did not recognize Joseph as the person who they were speaking to in Pharaoh's court. Joseph gives them everything they want. Then the story is they come and live in Egypt. That's how the Israelites got into Egypt, and that leads to the Exodus eventually. But in this scene, Joseph and his brother's father dies. Now, when there's an event in a family, when some member dies, especially when it's a patriarch or a matriarch, every dynamic in the family shifts. The brothers are well aware of that. And they're afraid that with their father dead, that Joseph would change his mind about his forgiveness and throw them in prison or have him murdered because he has the power to do so. They come to him and beseech Joseph to forgive them once again. And instead of being harsh and saying, "How dare you, these are all the things that you have done to me," he instead falls down and hugs them and weeps and forgives them without mentioning one single thing that they had done to him. He, in other words, throws it away, casts it aside. Now, this is why we have a bag of sand given to you today. You can do something with it now. You can do something with it 2 days from now, a month from now, a year from now. But this sand represents some hurt, some grief, some sin that has been fallen upon you from another human being, and which you have a hard time forgiving. And we carry these griefs, these hurts, these sins of others on us, and they're a burden. And what Christ asked Peter to do is what he asks us to do, is let go of these sins. And that to pour out on the ground as an act of our giving up those things which have hurt us and which we have had a horribly difficult time of forgiving. That act of pouring away of giving up is what we do when we forgive someone else. We may remember the hurt that they caused us. And we may have to remember and forgive every day of our lives. But in pouring that sand out and letting go of that hurt and letting go of whatever befell us because of that other person, we are freeing ourselves to love more and accept more of God into our hearts. This seems very difficult for us to do. That's why I say that sometimes we have to do this over and over again, because the hurt is so deep, the betrayal is so vast, that we have a hard time dealing with it. However, I want to share with you a story that I read again on the internet that I heard many years ago. And it's from Corrie ten Boom's book, The Hidden Place. And she was a Christian during World War II who hid Jewish folks in her house on her property. And she and her sister, who were both doing this, were discovered by the German troops, the Nazis, and they were sent to a concentration camp. There at that concentration camp, they suffered miserably. And Corrie ten Boom's sister died. After the war was over and she was released from that concentration camp, she went around preaching forgiveness at different Christian churches. And one evening after she did her talk about Christian forgiveness, a man came up to her. And this man had been one of her guards at the concentration camp. And he said to her, I was there. I did these horrible things. God has forgiven me. Now I want you to forgive me. And Corrie said that the words just stuck. That she felt it was impossible to forgive this person. But she also knew that she had to at least be mechanical about it. So she kept saying to herself, raise your hand, Corrie. Raise your hand. Raise your hand. And she did. Put it into his hand. Put it into his hand. Put it into his hand. And she did. And as she put it into his hand, as they grasped one another's hands, she said what became what was mechanical became extraordinarily rich. She felt a current exchange between the two of them. She felt a healing presence that she never had felt before. And she felt the love of Christ pour within her. She said that was a moment she never forgot in her whole life. That moment when she truly forgave that man for what had happened to her at that concentration camp. None of us, I believe, has had anything as bad as that happen to us. So it gives us another example, another archetype of how we can go about forgiving others. Do you want to carry bags of sand around with you, which burden you? Or do you want to give them up and be free to love God and to love one another? That's your decision. How many times do we forgive one another? 77 times. Infinite number of times. Christ does not want us to carry these burdens. Rather, he wants us to give them away so we can be free as he is free in the resurrection.